welcome to another episode of Hot Dog Telepathy's Short Stories. Sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Welcome back to Hot Dog Telepathy's podcast of short stories. This week's tale comes to you from a bookshop with a secret kept for many generations. If you like this story, please like, subscribe, follow, favorite, or whatever it is you do to make sure you get a notification when the next episode comes out. It's time now to listen to The Bookstore.
On the outskirts of the town of Gelfa, nestled between the old stone buildings and the cobbled stone streets, stands the antiquarian bookshop called Short Stories. The current owner, Ronald Short, had run the business since his father passed away about 10 years ago. The bookstore belonged to his grandfather and great-grandfather before that, so there was always an expectation that one day Ronald would take over too. Fortunately, like his forebears, he had books in his DNA and was an avid reader with a penchant for exploration, mystery, and the unknown. He would often write his own stories, filled with mystery and intrigue. Puzzles to keep the mind working as you read, with plot twists to make sure you didn't figure it out till the last page. He'd never had any of his books published, and only shown a few of them to friends, but he would still write prolifically whenever he could. When it was not busy in the bookshop, he would be at his desk writing his next great work. Early on Monday morning, he approached the shop to open up, as he always did. With stories in his head he wanted to get onto paper. The building was old and was filled with old books from when his predecessors owned the place, and opening the door after being locked up all day Sunday gave him such pleasure. The lock gave a satisfying click, and the key turned in the large wooden door, and Ronald pushed it open. The atmosphere is thick with the scent of aged paper. He breathed it deeply into his lungs. As he walked to his desk, the soft creaking of wooden floors made him feel at ease. After starting up the computer and filling the cash register, there was little to do to get ready for the day. He went to the back room and made himself a coffee and took it out to the front. He took a few short sips and decided to finish cataloging the books in the far back of the shop. His family knew how to own and sell books, but they didn't keep good records of what books they had and their current value. Most of these books were very old, assumedly left from when his grandfather owned the shop and had not been touched in years. As he ran his fingers along the spines of these ancient-looking books, he felt a subtle vibration in the air. Ronald looked around to see if there was anyone there, but the store was still empty. As he reached for the books again, he felt he was being drawn towards a section even further towards the back. No one had been in this section for years, as it was basically blocked off by piles of books and boxes that still needed sorting. He had never been in that section himself, as there were so many uncatalogued books it was overwhelming. It was one of those things where you will get to it one day, but never do. He was still trying to catalog the other sections, and this dark corner was a long way down his list. Drawn towards the farthest corner of the shop, he climbed over the boxes and stacks of dusty books. He held his hand a few centimeters away from the books, feeling them without touching them. As he passed over one of the dusty books, he felt a strong tug at his hand that drew it into the shelf. He grabbed the book and pulled it out of the shelf. He turned the book to read the title on the cover, "Stop Now, Forget This," by R. Short. He was intrigued by the title and more so by the writer's name. He didn't know that any of his family had written a book. He opened the cover to inspect the dedication page and published date, but they were blank, as was the entire book, page after page of blank paper. He could tell it was a very old book, so to be blank was strange. He went to place the book back into the shelf where he found it, and as he did so, a book from the shelf above fell to the floor. Heed Me by R. Short. Again, the pages in this book were blank. Why would someone get a blank notebook bound, as if it was a published book? It made no sense. As Ronald placed the book back onto the shelf next to the first one, he heard a crack from behind the bookshelf, and dust floated up from the books. He removed all the books from the shelf and could see there was a panel loose at the back of the shelf. As he cleared the books, he pushed on the panel, and it came loose. He could see a light coming through the crack between the panel and the wall. He removed the panel, and behind was an illuminated green switch. He pressed the button, and the rattle of chains and motors could be heard from behind the wall. Another panel opened behind the shelf, and within was a stack of books and what looked like a dumb waiter. The books looked like they had been in the box for a very long time, and he had no idea where the waiter went or where the books came from. He removed them carefully and blew the obviously ancient dust from the top one. The Tales of Ronald by R. Short was written on the cover in very old handwriting. He opened the book, and the first page was dated almost 150 years ago. He closed the dumbwaiter and panels and covered the spot on the shelf again, then sealed off that section of the shop so no one else could stumble across these old books. Back at his desk, he discovered that one of the books that had fallen off the shelf had somehow ended up on his desk before he came back. He picked it up and looked at it, trying to figure out how it had made it to his desk. It was the book titled Stop Now. Forget this. He opened the book again, and this time the pages were not blank, but filled with the words "Stop Now" over and over again. As he thumbed through the book, he realized the last few dozen pages were covered with the words "Please." He dropped the book in shock, and it fell to the floor. He stared at it for a few seconds, trying to comprehend what he was seeing. He bent to pick up the book, and as he did, he heard a loud sigh. Standing up, he expected to see a customer standing there watching him, but there was no one in the shop. He put the book on the desk. As he did, he heard another sigh and thought he heard a voice whisper, "I warned you, I'm sorry." He was, to say the least, unnerved. He opened the book called Tales of Ronald, expecting a memoir or story about the life of one of his ancestors, the author. It was not. The book read, "Early on Monday morning, Ronald approached the shop to open up, as he always did. With stories in his head he wanted to get onto paper. The building was old and was filled with old books from when his predecessors owned the place, and opening the door after being locked up all day Sunday gave him such pleasure. The lock gave a satisfying click, and the key turned in the large wooden door, and Ronald pushed it open. The atmosphere is thick with the scent of aged paper. He breathed it deeply into his lungs. As he walked to his desk, the soft creaking of wooden floors made him feel at ease. Ronald jumped up, knocking over the coffee he had made. He stared at the book in disbelief. How could someone have written this? It described him and how he opened the shop today, but it was written 100 years or so ago. As he stood there in shock, he felt a hand on his shoulder and heard a whisper, "Read no more." He spun around in fear, and as he did, he struck his head on a shelf and passed out on the floor. He instantly woke up at home in bed and sat bolt upright. He felt his head, and there was no pain or bruise from the shelf. He looked at the clock, and it showed just 4:30 a.m. Was it a dream? It had felt so real, but he was in bed, and it was early Monday morning. Ronald was flustered and confused, but convinced himself it was a dream and got ready for work. He arrived at the bookstore as normal and entered the shop excited to start the day. The dream had given him a great idea for a new story, and he was ready to start writing it down. He turned on the computer at his desk, then noticed the pool of coffee on the table and the broken cup on the floor. A cold sweat formed on his forehead as he saw the book from what he thought was his dream on the desk. Was it a dream, or was it all real after all?
I hope that you enjoyed this week's short story. I hope that these stories I present each week will give you some ideas for your own stories, or simply entertain you for just a few minutes while you listen. Until next time, stay connected with people around you, stay inspired, and keep embracing the power of storytelling. Thank you again for joining me today, and I'll catch you in the next episode of Hot Dog Telepathy's Short Stories.